June 15th, 1933, St. Paul, Minnesota, 12:45 p.m. William Hamm Jr. emerges from the massive oak doors of the administrative building of the Theodore Hamm Brewing Company. He is wearing an impeccable light linen suit, perfectly suited for the hot summer day. The air temperature has already reached 28 degrees Celsius, and a heavy, humid haze hangs over the city. Hamm is in no hurry. He is 39 years old, president of one of the largest brewing companies in the United States of America, and his life is governed by a strict, almost monarchical routine. Every day at this time, he takes the same walk. He walks on foot from the office to his family mansion, located just a few hundred meters away, on the top of Greenbrier Hill. Lunch awaits him there. This route is a symbol of his status. He walks on land that effectively belongs to his family, past buildings bearing his name. Workers bustle around. Trucks deliver crates of recently legalized beer, but no one dares disturb him. He feels absolutely safe. At the intersection of Minnehaha Avenue and Greenbrier Street, just a dozen steps from the sidewalk, a black Hudson sedan smoothly pulls up to the curb. The engine runs quietly, almost inaudibly. The car windows are rolled down. William stops, expecting that someone he knows wants to say hello. A young, slender man with a pale face steps out of the car. A polite, almost shy smile plays on his lips. He does not draw a weapon. He does not shout. He simply steps forward and extends his hand for a handshake, as if an old business partner. "Mr. Hamm?" the stranger asks in a calm voice. William nods. The instinct of a gentleman acts faster than the instinct of self-preservation. He extends his palm in response. In that second, when their skin touches, reality breaks. The stranger's grip turns out to be ironclad. The polite smile disappears, replaced by a cold, calculating grimace. This is Alvin Karpus, a man known in the criminal world by the nickname Creepy. He sharply yanks the millionaire towards himself. At the same time, the rear doors of the Hudson fly open. Two large men jump onto the scorching asphalt. One of them is Arthur Barker, known as Doc, the most ruthless member of the infamous gang. They grab the heir to the beer empire by the belt and neck, lifting his feet off the ground. Hamm tries to inhale to scream, but a rough blow to the solar plexus knocks all the air out of him. He is literally thrown onto the floor of the back seat. William's face presses into the dusty mat, smelling of gasoline and old leather. Someone's hand roughly pulls a dense white canvas sack over his head. The world plunges into darkness. "Keep quiet or I'll blow your brains out," a voice sounds right by his ear, accompanied by the characteristic click of a .45 caliber revolver's hammer being cocked. The door slams shut with a heavy metallic thud. The driver floors the gas pedal. The black Hudson peels out with a screech, leaving black tire marks on the intersection. Witnesses frozen on the sidewalk don't even have time to understand what happened. The entire incident, from the handshake to the car disappearing around the corner, took less than 45 seconds. At that moment, at 12:46 p.m., something greater than just the kidnapping of a rich man occurred in St. Paul. At that moment, the illusion of inviolability was destroyed. For decades, St. Paul had lived by the unique, corrupt system of Police Chief John O'Connor. It was an unspoken pact. Criminals from across the country could find refuge in the city, spend their dirty money here, and live in hotels, provided they committed no crimes within city limits. Gangsters and magnates walked the same streets, separated by an invisible wall of mutual neutrality. The Barker-Karpus gang had just rammed through that wall with their black sedan. While the car sped north toward the Wisconsin state line, William Hamm Jr. lay on the floor, suffocating in the stifling sack. A minute ago, he had been the king of St. Paul, heir to a dynasty, a man whose signature could move millions of dollars. Now, he was just cargo. Merchandise for which the kidnappers planned to demand a record sum, $100,000 in cash. But to understand the full depth of this tragedy, and why William Hamm specifically became the target that shattered the criminal truce of an entire era, we must go back. We need to see not the fall, but the rise. We need to understand how an empire was built from water, barley, and steely German will, becoming a golden cage for its owner. To understand why William Hamm Jr. ended up on the back seat of that black sedan with a sack over his head, we must rewind time 68 years. The story of his fall did not begin in 1933. It began in 1865, when his grandfather, Theodore Hamm, a German immigrant from the Baden region, arrived in Minnesota. Theodore was not a brewer by vocation. He was a butcher and owner of a boarding house, a pragmatic, tough man devoid of romantic illusions about the New World. His philosophy was built on a simple truth. In the chaos of the wild frontier, it is not the strongest who survives, but the most calculating. In 1865, Theodore Hamm was not seeking glory. He was seeking repayment of a debt. A local brewer named Andrew Keller had borrowed money from him, secured by his modest enterprise and land in the Phalen Creek ravine, but failed to pay it back. Instead of money, Theodore took the keys. This was an act of cold economic justice that defined the Hamm family DNA for a century ahead. They did not build castles in the sand. They seized concrete foundations from those who could not count. The brewery that fell to Theodore was tiny, producing just 500 barrels of beer a year. But Theodore saw what the previous owner had missed. And that was his first great strategy, which turned a local business into a national empire. The secret lay not on the surface, but deep underground. St. Paul stands on a massive layer of soft sandstone. Theodore Hamm realized he did not need to spend a fortune on ice, which was an expensive and scarce resource at the time. He began to dig. Workers armed with pickaxes and shovels gnawed into the rock, creating gigantic underground labyrinths. These artificial caves maintained a constant temperature of 12 degrees Celsius year-round, ideal conditions for lager maturation. While competitors went bankrupt on delivering ice from frozen lakes, Hamm used the free cold of the earth itself. It was a victory of geology over economics. By the end of the 19th century, Hamm Brewing Company had become not just a factory, but a city-shaping monster. The complex of red brick buildings with tall smokestacks dominated the landscape of eastern St. Paul like a medieval fortress. Hundreds of people worked here. Here, amid the steam, the smell of malt, and the clatter of copper vats, William's father was born. And then, in 1893, William Hamm Jr. himself. William Jr. grew up not just in wealth, he grew up inside a working mechanism. Unlike many heirs of the Gilded Age who fled to Europe to spend their parents' money, the Hamm men stayed at the factory. Their worldview was essentially German: order, discipline, control. Money was not a means of enjoyment. It was an indicator of the system's efficiency. When his father died in 1930, William inherited the president's chair. It was the worst possible moment to take office. America was in the deepest depression. The 1929 stock market crash had destroyed the fortunes of millions. Banks were closing by the thousands. People stood in lines for free soup. Moreover, prohibition was in effect. The 18th Amendment to the Constitution, adopted in 1919, was supposed to kill the Hamm business. Legal alcohol production was prohibited. Most breweries shut down, their equipment rusted, their owners went bankrupt. But not the Hamms. Here, the second survival strategy, embedded in their blood, manifested. Instead of surrendering or going underground like many others, William and his family repurposed the gigantic plant. They began producing malt syrup for baking, non-alcoholic beverages, and even industrial alcohol under government contracts. They played the long game. They kept the staff, kept the equipment, and, most importantly, kept the capital. By 1933, when Franklin Roosevelt signed the law repealing the beer ban, Hamm Brewing Company was ready for immediate startup. While competitors were just dusting off their vats, Hamm's trucks were already delivering fresh beer across the thirst-ravaged country. It was this triumph that made William Hamm Jr. a target. In the eyes of the public, and more importantly, in the eyes of the criminal world, he was not just a businessman. He was a symbol of unsinkability. In a world where everyone was out of money, Hamm had it. Cash. A lot of cash. William was a man of habit. His life was scheduled by the minute. Lunch at home, work in the office, evening with the newspaper. He was quiet, polite, avoided scandals and society columns. He believed that if he followed the rules, if he paid taxes and gave people jobs, the system would protect him. This was the naivety of a man who grew up behind the high brick walls of the factory. He did not understand one thing. The social contract had changed. The Great Depression gave birth to a new class of predators. People like Alvin Karpis and the Barker Gang, who looked at men like Hamm not with respect, but with hungry calculation. For them, the mansion on the hill was not a symbol of success, but a bank vault whose code needed to be cracked. William Hamm Jr. represented old money, patient, legal, accumulated by generations of labor and the strategy of ice caves. Karpis and the Barkers represented new money, fast, bloody, obtained through the barrel of a Thompson submachine gun. These two worlds, two philosophies, creation and taking, were inevitably bound to collide. And the point of their collision became not a courtroom or a board of directors, but the back seat of a stolen car speeding away from the grandeur of the beer empire into the unknown. William thought he controlled his fate because he controlled production, but he forgot that in the wild nature that America had become again, production schedules do not matter. Only strength matters. While William Hamm Jr. lay on the car floor, suffocating in the dust-soaked sack, a shadow was gathering over St. Paul that he, in his naivety, had not noticed for years. To understand the mechanics of this crime, we must look at the other side of the equation. If Hamm was the king of daylight and legal business, then Alvin Karpis was the prince of darkness and chaos. Their worlds were not supposed to intersect. But in 1933, in St. Paul, a unique, monstrous alliance was in effect, which historians would later call the O'Connor system. This was the very strategic marriage that determined Hamm's fate, a marriage between law and lawlessness. In the early 20th century, St. Paul Police Chief John O'Connor made a deal with the criminal world that had no analogues in the history of American cities. The terms were simple and cynical. Any criminal, be it a bank robber, murderer, or swindler, could come to St. Paul and feel completely safe. The police met them at the train station not with handcuffs, but with a nod of the head. Only 3 conditions needed to be met. First, check in upon arrival at a hotel and leave a donation to the police. Second, never commit crimes within city limits. Third, keep a low profile. St. Paul became Switzerland for gangsters. Here, in the luxurious lobbies of the St. Paul and Lowry hotels, At neighboring tables sat federal judges and people on the FBI's most wanted list. John Dillinger, Babyface Nelson, Machine Gun Kelly, all of them called this city home. It was a surreal idyll where wolves and sheep drank from the same source because the shepherd got a cut from each. But by June 1933, this system began to mutate. Alvin "Creepy" Karpis, the brain of the Barker gang, was not just a bandit with a gun. He was a strategist with a photographic memory and icy intellect. He understood the economics of crime better than many bankers understood market economics. Karpis saw what others did not. The era of bank robberies was coming to an end. Banks were fortifying, security was strengthening, and money in vaults was dwindling due to the Depression. The risk no longer justified the reward. A new business model was needed, and Karpis found it. Kidnapping. Abducting people. Unlike a bank robbery, where you fight a safe and armed guards, in kidnapping you attack the most vulnerable asset, human life. And for people like William Hamm, the price of life was astronomical. But to execute this plan, Karpis needed an insider. He needed a key to the city that would allow him to break the main taboo of the O'Connor system, to commit a crime right in St. Paul, under the nose of the police. And here enters the third key player, the man whose betrayal turned Hamm's kidnapping from a street attack into a state conspiracy. Thomas Archibald Brown. Former St. Paul police chief and, at the time of the kidnapping, head of the anti-kidnapping squad. This sounds like a bad screenwriter's invention, but it is a documented historical fact. The man responsible for finding the kidnappers was their business partner. Tom Brown did not just turn a blind eye to the presence of the Barker-Karpis gang in the city, he actively advised them. It was Brown, the man with a badge and a gun, who pointed the gangsters to William Hamm. This was an alliance of two worlds that was impossible to defeat. On one side, the brutality and operational experience of the Barker gang. Fred and Doc Barker were known for their psychopathic aggression. On the other side, administrative resources and protection from Tom Brown. Brown provided information on patrol car routes. Brown guaranteed that the area would be clear at the right moment. Brown essentially sold his richest and most law-abiding citizen for a share of the ransom. The meeting of old and new money did not happen in a bank, but in the shadow of corruption. Hamm was old money, predictable, slow, honest. The gang and Brown were new money, predatory, fast, and utterly unscrupulous. The choice of target was not accidental. Hamm's brewery and his mansion were not just buildings. They were monuments to stability in a world that was crumbling. The mansion on Greenbrier Street, where William lunched every day, was a fortress of Victorian morality. High ceilings, heavy drapes, the smell of wax and old wood, all of this created an illusion of eternity. Hamm believed that his status as a captain of industry made him untouchable, like a sacred cow. Karpis, on the other hand, looked at the mansion and saw not an architectural masterpiece, but a cash register. For him, Hamm's punctuality, this famous daily walk to lunch at 12:45, was not a virtue, but a fatal vulnerability. A man of habit is a dead man on vacation, Karpis might have said. The alliance of criminals and a police official created the perfect trap. They knew Hamm's route to the second. They knew he walked without guards because he believed in the city's deal. They knew the Hamm family would pay any amount because for them, the reputation and life of the family head were more important than gold. When the door of the Black Hudson slammed shut, it was the sound of a mousetrap snapping closed. which for 6 months had been engineered by America's best criminal minds, together with those who had sworn to serve and protect. The social layer of this crime went deeper than mere greed. It was a class war. The Barker Karpus gang consisted of sons of poor farmers from Oklahoma and Missouri, people cast aside to the margins of life. They looked at Hamm walking in his white linen suit down his own street and saw in him everything that was inaccessible to them. His calm offended them. His confidence in tomorrow aroused rage. By taking him, they did not just want to get $100,000. They wanted to humiliate that confidence. They wanted to show that in the new America of 1933, there were no rules, except the law of the strong. The fusion of gangster brutality and police corruption gave birth to a monster against which the beer magnate had not a single chance. In the car speeding toward the state line, William Hamm Jr. still did not know that his kidnapping was being overseen by the very man to whom his family would soon call for help. He was absolutely, totally alone. And while the city of St. Paul was preparing for the shock of the news, in a dark corner of one of the police headquarters offices, Thomas Brown was perhaps already calculating his share, looking at the map of the city he had betrayed. Now, with the victim captured and the protection system neutralized from within, we need to understand exactly what they attacked. We must look at the house that Hamm left and understand the psychology of the empire that suddenly proved powerless in the face of brute force. The mansion on the hill stood frozen in anticipation. While the black Hudson sedan dissolves into the road dust, carrying William Hamm Jr. into the unknown, on Greenbrier Hill continues to stand the silent witness to the greatness that has just been desecrated. To understand the scale of the loss, we must enter the world from which Hamm was torn. We must pass through the walls of his fortress. The Hamm Mansion and the adjacent brewery complex were not just real estate. It was an architectural, psychological portrait of an entire dynasty. It was the embodiment of the German soul, cast in red brick and limestone. If you stood at the foot of the hill on that sweltering June day, the first thing that would catch your eye is the overwhelming scale. The Theodore Hamm Brewing Company looked not like a factory, but like a feudal castle. Battlement walls, tall arched windows, massive smokestacks spewing white steam into the blue sky. This was architecture of domination. The building spoke to every resident of St. Paul. We were here before you, and we will be here after you. Climbing higher, to the mansion itself at 671 Greenbrier Street, you entered a zone of ringing silence. Here the noise of the city and the roar of the production lines below turned into a barely audible hum, like the beating of a gigantic heart. Let us mentally open the heavy front door. Inside reigns a twilight designed to protect the inhabitants from the summer heat. The air here is dense, still. It smells of beeswax, old paper, and a faint aroma of hops that permeated the clothes of every man in the Hamm lineage. This is the smell of money. The interior of the house is a hymn to conservatism. There is no flashy luxury of the jazz era, no gold toilets or modernist sculptures typical of the nouveau riche of the 1920s. Every detail here is functional and weighty. Furniture of dark oak and mahogany, brought from Europe, stands in its places for decades, as if rooted in the floor. Heavy velvet drapes on the windows cut off the outside world, creating a time capsule. Let us proceed to the dining room. This is where William was heading. The table is set with surgical precision. Snow-white tablecloth, starched to a crisp. Silver utensils, polished by servants to a mirror shine, lie strictly parallel to each other. A crystal glass awaits water. A porcelain plate awaits food. This room is the center of William Hamm's universe. Here, in this strict order, his psychology is revealed. He was not an adventurer. He was a custodian, a man for whom predictability was synonymous with happiness. Every item in this room screams of stability. The clock in the corner ticks the rhythm of a life that has not changed since his grandfather's time. Tick-tock, tick-tock. Order, control, safety. But the true soul of this place is not in the dining room, but deep under the floor on which the house stands. Under the mansion and the factory stretches that very network of caves dug into the sandstone half a century ago. This is the subconscious of the house. Dark, cool labyrinths where the temperature never rises above 12 degrees. There, in the darkness, in huge cypress barrels, beer matures. Millions of gallons of liquid that turned into the Hamm's fortune. These caves symbolize the family's foundation. Labor hidden from prying eyes, patience, and cold calculation. While upstairs, in the high-ceilinged parlors, society news was discussed. Below, in the darkness, the capital-producing machine worked. In 1933, about 700 people worked at the brewery. For comparison, this is the population of a small American town. William Hamm Jr. was not just a business owner, he was the mayor of this industrial city-state. His office was the entire hill. His power seemed absolute. The contrast between this monumentality and the event that occurred on the street is staggering. Look at the library. Bookshelves to the ceiling, filled with volumes on jurisprudence, chemistry, and history. Leather armchairs that take the shape of the owner's body. Here, William made decisions affecting the fates of hundreds of families. Here, he felt like the captain of a ship, able to navigate through the storm of the Great Depression and the reefs of Prohibition. The walls of this room, paneled with wood, created the illusion of impenetrable armor. But the architecture deceived him. The grandeur of the mansion created a false sense of invulnerability. Thick walls protected from wind and cold, but they could not protect from people who had nothing but desperation and automatic weapons. At 1 p.m. on June 15th, the house begins to worry. Servants, accustomed to the master's punctuality, exchange glances. The soup cools. Fresh bread begins to stale. The ticking of the grandfather clock's pendulum becomes louder, more insistent. The silence in the house changes its quality. From soothing, it becomes ominous. Things, these expensive, heavy, eternal things, suddenly lose their meaning without the master. The armchair in the library is empty. The silver fork on the table is useless. The mansion turns into a mausoleum. The psychology of this space was built on the idea of legacy. From grandfather to father, from father to son. The house was built to stand forever. But now, with the heir disappeared, the grandeur of stone underscores the fragility of flesh. This entire empire, millions of dollars in assets, hundreds of trucks, thousands of acres of land, tens of thousands of square meters of production space, devalued in 1 second. No architecture, no oak doors, no underground vaults could stop 4 men in a cheap car. At this moment, we see the main paradox of Hamm's wealth. He built a fortress to isolate himself from the chaos of the world. But chaos did not storm the walls. It simply waited until the owner of the fortress went for a walk. The mansion on Greenbrier Hill remained standing, its windows shining in the sun. But its soul was kidnapped. The grandeur of architecture collided with the reality of banditry, and architecture lost. Now this house is not a fortress. It is just an expensive address in a police report, a golden cage from which the bird was stolen. And while the servants anxiously watch the cooling lunch, William Hamm Jr. experiences a completely different architecture. The architecture of a cramped room, with taped-over windows, where the only piece of furniture will be a chair to which he will be tied. While the St. Paul police simulated frantic activity and newspapers printed screaming headlines, William Hamm Jr. ceased to be the company president, a millionaire and heir to the empire. In a stuffy second-floor room of an unremarkable house in Bensonville, Illinois, he turned into an object, a living asset whose value was measured solely by his family's ability to find cash. The human tragedy of this moment lay not in torture. Alvin Karpis and the Barker gang were not inquisitors, but pragmatists. They did not pull out nails or break bones. They did something more terrible. They destroyed the will through total uncertainty. Hamm was kept in a room whose windows were sealed tight with thick paper. He lost track of time. Day blended with night. The only landmarks were footsteps outside the door and the sound of a turning key. He was not allowed to see the kidnappers' faces. Every time the door opened, he was required to turn his face to the wall and pull that same canvas sack over his head. Here, in the darkness, William's main internal conflict unfolded. All his life, he managed people. He gave orders. He controlled processes. Now, he was absolutely helpless. He was forced to ask permission to go to the toilet. They gave him food when they deemed it necessary and water when they remembered. The most agonizing aspect was the psychological game played by Arthur "Doc" Barker. If Karpis was a cold businessman, then Doc was the embodiment of unpredictable violence. He would enter the room, press the gun barrel to Hamm's nape, and start reasoning aloud that it was easier to kill the hostage right now than to bother with delivering the money. William heard his breathing, felt the cold metal on the sweaty skin of his neck, and understood. This man was not bluffing. It was precisely in this room that the moral breakdown occurred. Hamm, a man of principles, a man of the law, was forced to collaborate with evil to survive. He was given paper and a fountain pen. He was ordered to write 4 notes. The first was intended for his family. The second, for his business partner, William Dunn. By signing these papers, Hamm committed an act of capitulation. He asked to pay the criminals $100,000. In 1933, this was a colossal sum. It was the equivalent of $2.5 million in modern terms. These were the money earned by the labor of hundreds of his factory workers. And now he, with his own hand, was handing this money to murderers, knowing that it would go toward new Thompson submachine guns, new fast cars, and probably new kidnappings. But there was no choice. Here enters the second key character of this drama, William Dunn. Vice President of Sales at the brewery, Hamm's closest friend and trusted confidant. It was Dunn who became that very catalyst without which the story might have ended with a body in a ditch. While Hamm sat in the darkness in Illinois, Dunn was in the hell of uncertainty in St. Paul. He received instructions. He knew that the police, led by corrupt figures, were useless and even dangerous. If he had reported the kidnappers' call to the wrong people, Hamm would have been killed instantly. Dunn faced a monstrous dilemma. How to act correctly? Pay means fund terrorism and admit the impotence of the law. Not pay means sign a death sentence for his friend. Dunn chose life. He took on the role of intermediary. On June 17th, following instructions transmitted over the phone by an emotionless voice, William Dunn got into a car. A bag lay on the back seat. It contained $100,000 in small bills, $5, $10, and $20 notes. The bill numbers had not been recorded by the police. At least, that's what the kidnappers thought. These were dirty, untraceable bills. The ransom delivery route was devised by Carpus with ingenious cruelty. Dunn was made to circle the roads around St. Paul, changing directions, stopping at specific poles and signs, until he was completely convinced that there was no tail behind him. The final point was on Highway 61, on the road to Pine City. It was deep night. Dunn's car headlights snatched tree trunks from the darkness, resembling ghosts. When he saw the prearranged signal, the flashing headlights of an oncoming car, he had to act quickly. Dunn threw the bag of money into the roadside ditch and floored the gas, not looking back. At that moment, the money transitioned from the world of creation to the world of destruction. $100,000, which could have gone toward factory modernization or workers' salaries, disappeared into the darkness in the hands of people who had never created anything in their lives except fear. For William Hamm, these days in captivity became the point of no return. He would never again be that self-confident captain of industry he had been before June 15th. Sitting on the shaky chair in Bensonville, he realized the fragility of his existence. His titles, his bank accounts, his name, here, in the face of Doc Barker, all of it was worth exactly zero. The only currency was life, and the exchange rate was set by the bandits. On June 17th, after receiving the money, the mood in the Bensonville house changed. Carpus counted the bills. The amount matched. "Deal closed," he said. But for Hamm, this was the most terrifying moment. He knew the statistics.
He knew that witnesses are often eliminated after the ransom is received. Why leave alive a man who had seen their faces, even if fleetingly, heard their voices? Doc Barker did indeed suggest killing Hamm. "Dead men don't testify," was his philosophy. But Carpus, true to his business approach, insisted on release. "If we kill him after getting the money, no one will ever pay ransom again. We'll kill the market." Such was his logic. William Hamm's life was saved not by mercy, but by the criminal world's market strategy. On June 19th at dawn, the black sedan braked again. This time, on a dirt road near the town of Wyoming, Minnesota. The door opened. "Get out," a voice commanded. Hamm was shoved out of the car. He fell onto the grass, wet with morning dew. The sack was still over his head. He lay there, afraid to move, waiting for a shot in the back. He heard the engine roar and the tires crunch on the gravel as they drove away. A minute. 2. Silence. Only birdsong. With trembling hands, William pulled the canvas sack off his head. The bright morning light hit his eyes, blinding him. He was alive. He stood up, staggering from weakness and dehydration. His expensive linen suit had turned into dirty rags. His face was covered in stubble. He was alone on an empty road 30 miles from home. But this was not the end of the story. This was only the beginning of the crisis. William Hamm Jr. returned to the world of the living, but the world he returned to had changed forever. And most importantly, he did not return empty-handed. Unbeknownst to him, on the tips of his fingers and in the pores of his skin, he carried out of captivity the weapon that would soon destroy his tormentors. The moral ambivalence of this situation was absolute. The criminals won, having received the money, but it was precisely their greed and confidence in impunity that triggered a mechanism of retribution they could not foresee. Hamm staggered toward the nearest farm to make a phone call. He did not yet know that this call would awaken not only his family, but also a man in Washington for whom the Hamm case would become a personal war. The name of this man
was J. Edgar Hoover. The tragedy of the kidnapping ended. The drama of investigation and transformation began. When William Hamm Jr. returned to his mansion on Greenbrier Street, he looked like a ghost. Physically, he was intact, except for weight loss and dehydration, but psychologically, he remained in that dark room in Illinois. However, the true crisis that erupted after his release concerned not so much his personality as the very fabric of American society. The Barker Karpus gang celebrated victory. They had committed the perfect crime. They kidnapped one of America's richest men, received $100,000 in cash, and melted into the night. No one had seen their faces. No one knew where they were hiding. From the criminal world's perspective, this was a triumph of a new era, where audacity and the Thompson submachine gun decided everything. They thought they had outplayed the system. But they made one fatal mistake. They underestimated the power of the invisible. In June 1933, a new force arrived in St. Paul that did not obey the rules of the O'Connor system. These were agents of the Bureau of Investigation, an organization that would soon become known as the FBI. At the head of this force stood an ambitious, paranoid, and order-obsessed J. Edgar Hoover. For Hoover, the Hamm case was not just another kidnapping. It was a challenge. At that time, his agents did not even have the right to carry weapons without special permission, and their authority was limited to state borders. Gangsters laughed at them. Hoover needed a victory that would prove the necessity of creating a powerful federal police. He needed a scientific precedent. The key to the solution lay in 4 sheets of paper, the very ransom demand notes that William Hamm signed with a trembling hand under the barrel of Doc Barker's pistol. These notes were sent to Washington, to the newly created forensic laboratory of the Bureau. At first glance, it was a dead end. The bandits were professionals. They worked in gloves. The standard fingerprint powder procedure yielded absolutely no results. The porous, fibrous paper absorbed all traces. There was nothing for the powder to stick to. It seemed the criminals had foreseen everything. But they did not account for chemistry. In the FBI lab, experts decided to apply an experimental technology that had never before been used in cases of this scale. It was the silver nitrate method. The principle was ingeniously simple, and at the same time incredibly complex for that time. Human sweat contains sodium chloride, ordinary salt. When a person touches paper, even if their hands seem dry, microscopic salt particles penetrate deep into the fiber structure. The salt remains there forever, invisible to the eye and inaccessible to powder. Bureau experts immersed the notes in a silver nitrate solution. In the dark room of the lab, a chemical reaction began. Silver ions combined with chlorine ions left by the criminal's fingers, forming silver chloride. Then came the moment of truth. The paper was exposed to bright light. Like on photographic film during development, dark, reddish-brown lines began to appear on the blank sheets. From nothingness, from emptiness, patterns began to form. These were not just spots. These were clear, detailed fingerprints. This was the moment of transformation. The moment when forensics transitioned from the era of guesses to the era of science. Analysis showed an irrefutable match. The prints belonged to Arthur "Doc" Barker. Traces of Alvin Karpus were also found on the paper. These brown lines on the paper became the death sentence for the golden age of gangsters. For the first time in history, the FBI had material, scientific evidence linking specific individuals to the kidnapping, despite the absence of witnesses. But the discovery had a second, more terrifying layer. The investigation began to uncover the abscess of corruption in St. Paul itself. Bureau agents quickly realized they were operating in a hostile environment. The local police did not just remain inactive, they sabotaged the investigation. Information that the feds shared with local detectives miraculously ended up with the bandits within an hour. Suspicion fell on Tom Brown, head of the anti-kidnapping squad. This was an unprecedented crisis of trust. Those who were supposed to catch the kidnappers dined with them. Hoover and his men realized they could not arrest Karpis in St. Paul using local resources. The city was compromised. This led to a tectonic shift in law enforcement methods. The FBI isolated the St. Paul police from the investigation. This was the end of the O'Connor system. The unspoken deal that had protected gangsters for decades was torn apart not by a moral choice of a mayor or sheriff, but by a vial of silver nitrate in Washington. For William Hamm Jr., this news became a strange, bitter consolation. His sufferings were not in vain. The sweat of fear that he shed signing those notes, and the sweat of greed left on them by his tormentors, mingled to create a weapon of retribution. Hamm's worldview transformed. If at the beginning of the story he believed in protection through status and mansion walls, now he understood. In the modern world, protection lies in the realm of information and technology. The money he lost became payment for this lesson for the entire nation. At the same time, panic began in the criminal world. Karpis, this genius of the criminal world, creepy, who calculated every move, suddenly felt the ground slipping from under his feet. He did not understand how they found him. He did not know about silver nitrate. It seemed to him that some mystical force, the all-seeing eye, was pursuing him. Paranoia began to eat away at the gang from within. The events of the summer of 1933 forever changed the balance of power. The era of romanticized bandits, Robin Hoods of the Great Depression, ended. The era of professional detection began. Science made impossible what had previously been the foundation of criminal craft: anonymity. Hamm's mansion was no longer just the victim's house. It became the starting point of a new reality. Exactly here, at the intersection of old money, bandit audacity, and new science, America lost its innocence, but gained the tools of justice. However, the crisis was not yet fully resolved. The criminals were identified, but they were still at large, armed, and extremely dangerous. The gang understood they had been cornered, and a cornered beast, as is known, attacks first. The fingerprints on Hoover's desk demanded action. The hunt began. But this hunt would lead not only to shootouts and arrests, it would lead to a rethinking of what it means to leave a mark in history. William Hamm wanted to leave a legacy in the form of a beer empire. The Barker gang wanted to leave a legend of their elusiveness. But history, with its cruel irony, destined for them a completely different immortality. Now it was time for the final act. For justice that comes not with the thunder of cannons, but with the quiet tap of a judge's gavel and the creak of Alcatraz prison bars. The story of William Hamm Jr.'s kidnapping did not end when he returned home, nor when the ink dried on police reports. It ended with the total destruction of the old world. The fingerprints revealed by silver nitrate became the epitaph for the era of romanticized gangsterism. The fate of the participants in this drama unfolded with cruel symmetry. Those who considered themselves hunters very quickly turned into prey. Arthur "Doc" Barker, the man who pressed a pistol to Hamm's head, was sent to Alcatraz, the prison created specifically for men like him. In 1939, he attempted to escape. The guards opened fire. A bullet hit him in the head. He died as he lived, in chaos and violence, on the cold stones washed by the icy waters of San Francisco Bay. Alvin Karpis, the brain of the gang, evaded capture longer than anyone, but the science he underestimated followed his trail. In 1936, he was arrested in New Orleans. He became public enemy number one. Karpis spent 26 years in Alcatraz, longer than any other inmate in the history of that prison. The genius of the criminal world ended his days teaching other inmates to play the guitar, turning into a living museum exhibit of his own long-gone era. And what about Thomas Brown, the corrupt police chief who sold his city? His fall was slow, but inevitable. The federal investigation lanced the abscess. He was dishonorably dismissed from the police. The man who controlled the law died in obscurity, despised by both sides of the conflict, cops and bandits alike. St. Paul was cleansed. The O'Connor system collapsed, and the city ceased to be a refuge for murderers. William Hamm Jr. lived a long life. He died in 1970 at the age of 76. He continued to lead the brewery, which, after the repeal of Prohibition, reached unprecedented heights, becoming at one point the fifth largest beer producer in the country. But those who knew him closely said that he changed forever. The shadow of those 4 days in Bensonville never left his eyes. He built even higher walls, hired guards, but lost the main thing: the sense of security that comes to a person by right of birth. He understood that money is not armor. Money is a target. Today, if you come to St. Paul, you will see a strange picture. The mansion on Greenbrier Hill, this symbol of immutability, was demolished in the 1950s. In its place remained emptiness. The brewery, this industrial monster of red brick, closed in 1997. The giant workshops stood abandoned, like skeletons of prehistoric animals, until they began to be converted into lofts and offices. The Hamm Empire, which seemed eternal, dissolved in time. Of the millions of dollars, the golden reserves, the majestic halls, almost nothing remained except faded labels on collectible bottles. But there is one legacy of this story that is still alive today. It is not in St. Paul, but in every police laboratory in the world, in every airport, in every smartphone that you unlock with a touch of your finger. The Hamm case became a bifurcation point for humanity. It was then, in June 1933, that we stepped into the era of biometric control. The silver nitrate method proved that we leave a part of ourselves on everything we touch. We can no longer be invisible. Today's DNA technologies, facial recognition, digital footprints, all of them are direct descendants of those 4 sheets of paper developed in a dark room in Washington. The kidnapping of the beer magnate inadvertently gave the state keys to absolute control. We traded privacy for security, and this deal was sealed on the back seat of a black Hudson. In the finale of this story, there is a profound irony. William Hamm wanted to leave behind a dynasty. Alvin Karpis wanted to leave behind a legend and money. But the only thing that remained from both of them in eternity, these are fingerprints on yellowed paper stored in the FBI archives under glass. This is a lesson about the nature of immortality. We spend our lives building castles of stone and concrete, accumulating numbers and accounts, believing that this is our legacy. But stone crumbles, money depreciates, and corporations go bankrupt. True legacy is how our actions change the rules of the game for everyone else. William Hamm Jr. entered history not as a great brewer, but as a man whose tragedy taught the law to see the invisible.
His suffering became the foundation of our security, and in this sense, he still built something eternal. Not from brick, but from truth. The next time you take a cold glass of beer in your hand, or press your finger to a scanner, remember St. Paul of 1933. Remember how fragile the world of old money is in the face of brute force, and how powerless brute force is in the face of science. In this eternal war, victory goes not to the one with more gold, nor to the one with more bullets. Victory goes to the one who knows how to read the traces we leave in the darkness.